People always think they know who holds the real power in a courtroom. The loudest voice. The biggest ego. The one who smirks like the world owes him something. On that day, everyone thought it was him. A heavy-set man with designer sunglasses pushed onto his forehead, cheap jewelry clinking like it meant something, and a grin that could curdle milk. He walked in like he owned the place, like the courtroom was his stage and arrogance was his script. And the moment he sat down, he leaned back, crossed his arms, and whispered loud enough for the world to hear. He's rich enough. I don't pay people who already have more than me. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The audience chuckled nervously. The plaintiff lowered his gaze, and for a moment, a rare moment, even Judge Judy was silent. Not the silence of fear, no. The silence of someone who has been underestimated too many times. Someone who knows that storms don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, then tear the world open. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam her bench. She simply adjusted her glasses. And the courtroom felt colder. The landlord, an older man with gentleness in his eyes and tired lines carved into his face, clutched a stack of documents. Not shaking from weakness, but from dignity. The kind people only notice when it's on the verge of being betrayed. He didn't come here for revenge. He came to defend something that mattered more than money, self-respect. But the man beside him didn't see that. He leaned forward and laughed again, louder this time, as if humility was a language he never learned. This whole system favors rich people, he scoffed, shrugging like unpaid rent was a badge of honor. Why should I help him get richer when I can use his money to live better? The room shifted and you could feel it. A moral earthquake rumbling under polished floors and polished lies. For a split second, even Judge Judy looked like the smaller figure in the room, quiet, composed, underestimated. And then, something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, something colder, sharper. The kind of calm that only people with real strength carry. She didn't call him out. Not yet, she didn't need to. She simply asked one question, her voice soft, almost too soft. How long has he been waiting for you to act like a man instead of a parasite? No scream, no slam. Just precision. Surgical. You could feel the air leave the heavy man's lungs. His smile stumbled. His confidence cracked. Something was hidden here, and Judy already saw it. A truth that would rip the mask from arrogance and reveal everything the world wasn't supposed to see. Because this case wasn't about rent. It wasn't about entitlement. It was about a man who mistook generosity for weakness, and a judge who knew that sometimes the smallest person in the room is the one who stands tallest when the truth arrives, and that truth was only beginning to surface. Before I tell you how Judge Judy turned silence into a sword, tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone mock kindness, thinking it made them strong? Your story might help someone today. Now let's continue. For a heartbeat, the courtroom remained frozen, not by noise but by stillness. That's the dangerous thing about quiet power. When it finally speaks, the world has to listen. But the man at the defense table, he didn't understand silence. Not the kind Judge Judy wielded. His world only respected volume, swagger, and the childish throne he built from excuses. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the stand, his belly pressing against the wood as he chuckled. A smug, careless laugh that carried across the courtroom like cheap perfume. Lady, I don't have to act like anything, he said, waving a dismissive hand in Judy's direction. Rich people don't suffer. They just pretend to. The landlord's head lowered again, not because of shame, but because kindness has a way of breaking when it's stepped on enough times. His voice was soft when he finally spoke. I trusted him, he said. When he moved in, he didn't have much. He told me he needed a chance. I lowered the rent for him, even waived the security deposit at first. He said he'd catch up when he got on his feet. The defendant snorted, rolling his eyes. Yeah, and I did get on my feet. Which is exactly why I don't need to pay. He's got plenty. Someone like him losing a little money? That's nothing. A ripple of discomfort went through the room. You could see people shifting, lips tightening, cheeks flushing. People hate arrogance, not because it's loud, but because it humiliates the quiet truths we live by. Effort, respect, decency. Judge Judy blinked once, slowly, as if absorbing every atom of disrespect floating in the air. She didn't respond to the man, not yet. Instead, she turned to the landlord. How many months of rent are owed? She asked softly. 7 months, he replied. His voice cracked not from weakness, but from disappointment so deep it sat heavy on his breath. He always promised he'd pay soon. He always had a story, a new excuse, and I believed him. The defendant leaned back, lacing his fingers behind his head. spreading himself wide like a man convinced the world could fit in the palm of his arrogance. "I don't see the issue," he scoffed. "He lives in one of the nicest neighborhoods. Plenty of tenants, plenty of money, someone like him. He'll be fine, that was it." That was the phrase that exposed him. Worse than unpaid rent, worse than excuse entitlement. He believed the world existed to cushion him. He believed generosity was a resource he deserved to exploit. He believed money erased morality. Judy's voice cut through the stillness, not sharpened but weighted, like a judge handing down fate not through force, but through truth. "Tell me," she said, her tone calm as a whisper, "when exactly did you decide that someone else's kindness was your birthright?" The man's jaw tightened. He didn't have an answer. So he did what insecure people always do, and he attacked. "You know what?" he snapped. "You judges live in your mansions. Act like you understand people like us. He's a landlord. He profits off people just trying to survive." He pointed at Judy, a reckless hand fueled by ego. "And don't look at me like you have moral high ground. You think you're better than the rest of us." The room inhaled sharply. Even those who didn't know law knew something sacred had just been violated. But Judy, she didn't flinch. Sometimes power is loud. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's a pause so devastating it strips lies before words can. "I don't think I'm better than you," she said. "I just don't behave worse." Silence thundered. The defendant blinked. Twice. He didn't expect intelligence, and he expected intimidation. "So let me understand," she continued, leaning forward ever so slightly, her glasses sliding down just enough to reveal steel beneath kindness. "He gave you shelter when you had nowhere. He gave you time when you had none. He extended grace when you didn't deserve it. And your response was, to steal from him and mock him? I didn't steal anything." The man's voice was suddenly smaller. "I just used the opportunity." Judy's eyes darkened, not with anger but with sorrow for what people become when they confuse survival with selfishness. "No," she said. "You abused help and you called it strategy. You hid behind need long after you had enough. You turned compassion into currency. That is an opportunity." She let the words fall like judgment already cast. "That's cowardice pretending to be clever." The man's shoulders stiffened. His confidence flickered. The bravado drained, revealing something raw, fragile. Fear of accountability. I contributed," he stammered. "I cleaned. Sometimes. I helped maintain." "You lived rent-free," Judy cut in gently. "Not because you couldn't pay, but because you didn't want to." A lesson hung in the air, heavy as truth. Needing help is human. Abusing it is character. The plaintiff swallowed hard, eyes glassy. Not because he wanted victory, but because decency had finally been defended. And in that moment, Judge Judy wasn't the feared judge or the sharp-tongued legend. She was what real authority looks like when stripped bare, quiet fairness carved by years of watching humanity fail and rise in the same breath. She looked back at the defendant, her voice soft, not attacking. Worse, disappointed. "You didn't come here to prove you're right. You came to justify never being wrong." The man opened his mouth to respond, and suddenly the courtroom no longer belonged to his arrogance. It belonged to justice, waiting, ready to expose the part of the story no one saw coming yet. Because there was still something hidden, something he didn't know would surface. And when it did, arrogance would crumble, dignity would rise, and the truth would take everything else with it. Arrogance has a rhythm, loud, confident, and always convinced the world will clap along. But there's a moment, a very specific moment, when that rhythm falters, not because anyone shouted it down, but because truth walked in quietly and stood behind it. That moment had arrived. The defendant shifted in place, no longer leaning back with the posture of a man untouchable. His hand moved to adjust his shirt, his eyes darting toward the gallery as if suddenly aware that mocking generosity was not a strength anyone admired. Judge Judy lifted the first sheet of paper from the case file. "Let's look at the timeline," she murmured, her voice steady. "Neutral. The kind of tone that people mistake for softness right before it ruins them." The landlord offered reduced rent for the first 3 months. The room stayed still. "He forgave late fees, repeatedly." A lady in the back row raised her brows. "And after you began earning, you still did not pay." She placed the sheet down, folded her hands, and just looked at him. Not with rage, with clarity. And clarity is the sharpest blade in any courtroom. The defendant opened his mouth, but she raised a finger. Just one. A silent reminder. You will speak when truth allows it, not arrogance. She turned her gaze to the landlord. "Why did you waive the late fees?" The man hesitated, his voice soft, weighted with something personal, something he would have preferred to keep private. He said, "His mother was ill. He told me he was struggling to keep up with hospital expenses. I believed him. You could feel the breath leave half the room. Sympathy surfaced. A few heads shook, not at the landlord, but at the man who used sickness as a shield. The landlord swallowed, his voice trembling, not weak, but tired from being too strong for too long. I didn't want him to lose his home during something like that. I remembered what it felt like to be young and scared. So I helped him, a kindness no one ever heard about, a sacrifice no one ever saw. And the defendant? He scoffed. She was sick. But I mean, he didn't need to go that far. That's his choice. Doesn't make me a villain. There it was. The brittle shell trying desperately not to crack. Judge Judy did not react immediately. She let silence do the speaking, and silence in her hands was artillery. You lied about your mother's health to avoid paying rent? She asked. Never said she died, he mumbled, shrugging. Just used the truth in a way that worked for me. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Disgust. Disbelief. Disappointment. Judy's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. Compassion was offered to you, and you weaponized it. His jaw tightened. I had to look out for myself. That isn't self-preservation, she said. It's self-infatuation. For the first time, his bravado looked heavy. Like a costume he regretted putting on but couldn't take off without admitting who he really was underneath. Then Judy leaned forward, not overpowering him, simply taking back the space he had tried to steal. You keep insisting he's wealthy and you are not. Is that correct? He nodded quickly, eager for familiar ground. Yes, he has properties. He has stability. Why should someone like me? And yet, Judy interrupted gently, with all his resources, he still showed you empathy. And with nothing to your name but excuses, you offered him contempt. The gallery exhaled as if someone had punctured a balloon inflated with arrogance. He froze. No comeback, no swagger, just the sudden suffocating awareness that the room saw him. Not the image he projected, but the truth he had been hiding beneath it. Judge Judy didn't slam the gavel. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, you didn't exploit wealth. You betrayed generosity. And that sentence, quiet as it was, landed harder than any shout could have. He looked away then, that subtle tilt of the head people make when the fight isn't over. But they already feel the loss spreading through their bones because this wasn't about unpaid rent anymore. This was about the part of him he hoped no one would see, and the part the world now couldn't unsee. The truth wasn't done yet, and neither was she. There was still one reveal left, one detail not yet spoken that would shatter the last piece of armor he thought he had. And when it came, he would break in front of everyone. When pride begins to suffocate, it doesn't go quietly. It thrashes. And in that courtroom, pride was choking hard. The defendant shifted again, tugging at his collar like the air had grown too thick to swallow. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a twitch. The kind people get when they realize their bluff has been called, but they still can't admit the hand was empty. Judge Judy didn't speak at first. She simply studied him. She had the patience of someone who had watched countless people try to climb moral mountains, using ropes made of excuses. The kind that always snap. You said you had to look out for yourself. She began slowly, her voice almost gentle. Tell me, in your mind is survival the same as deception? He forced a laugh, but it sounded like it hurt coming out. I didn't deceive anyone, I just used the situation. Used kindness, she corrected softly. He glanced at the gallery, searching for someone, anyone who agreed. But not one face tilted in sympathy. Even the air seemed to lean away from him. Judy turned back to the landlord. How long did he claim his mother was in treatment? The landlord took a breath, steadying emotions that had been bruised long before today. From month 4 onward, he said. He'd send messages, hospital bills, doctor's appointments. Said every paycheck went to helping her. Judy's brow lifted. And did you see those bills? The landlord nodded. Screenshots, photos. The defendant jumped in, desperate for control. They were real. I never said they weren't real. Judy raised a hand, not harsh but firm. Real bills. She leaned back, her expression unreadable. For a woman who wasn't receiving treatment. The room froze again, though this time the silence felt like it was watching him drown. He swallowed hard. I mean, she had treatment at some point. I just reused the photos. There it was. The truth trying to sneak out in pieces, hoping fragmentation would soften the blow. Judy tilted her head, a quiet sadness in her eyes. You didn't reuse photos. You reused suffering. He looked away. His voice small now, fragile around the edges. You act like I committed a crime. Judy clasped her hands together. There are crimes against law, she said softly. And then there are crimes against humanity. A hush fell, the kind that settles when moral gravity pulls everyone down at once. You could have worked out a payment plan, she continued. You could have paid in installments. You could have been honest. The defendant's lips quivered, the bravado now a paper mask melting under heat. And if I did? He whispered. He still wouldn't have needed the money. That sentence, so revealing, so painfully small, pulled a sharp inhale from the gallery. You mistook generosity for wealth, Judy said. And assumed wealth comes without sacrifice. She motioned to the landlord. Tell me, why did you have reduced income during those months? The landlord hesitated, not for drama but because humility doesn't like recounting pain. My wife, he said quietly. She was recovering from surgery. I took time off work to care for her. Income slowed. We tightened expenses. Judy's voice softened. And yet you still extended mercy. He nodded once. It felt like the right thing, a pause. Then Judy turned to the defendant, voice like silk wrapped around steel. While you pretended your mother was ill, his wife actually was. The man's face fell, not in shock, but in shame so dense it was nearly visible. The courtroom didn't gasp this time. They didn't need to. The truth didn't need applause, and it had already won. You didn't just steal money, Judy said. You stole empathy. You took kindness from someone who needed kindness himself. His voice broke slightly, a crack in concrete. I didn't know. That is not a defense, Judy replied, voice steady. That is a confession. The heavy-set man stared down at the table, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths, as if each inhale now demanded humility he'd never practiced. And do you know the cruelest part? Judy asked. You believed wealth meant he wouldn't feel your betrayal, but the wealthy don't feel these cuts less. She leaned forward, and now her voice, barely above a whisper, carried the weight of every case she ever presided over. They feel them more, Paz, because they chose generosity when they didn't have to. And you chose exploitation when you didn't need to. He blinked fast, fighting the sting behind his eyes. Pride was bleeding, and there was nothing left to cover the wound. There was no explosion, no shouting, just the slow collapse of ego under the unbearable truth of its own reflection. And yet, one more piece still waited in the shadows, a revelation that would turn this from moral lesson into reckoning. The courtroom didn't know it. He didn't know it. But Judy did, and she wasn't done, not even close. Humiliation rarely arrives with thunder. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding only one sentence, and that's enough to bring an empire of ego to its knees. Judge Judy folded her hands and looked at the defendant. Not like a judge looking at a case, but like a human being looking at someone who had never learned what humanity meant. You say he has more, she began softly, and because he has more you felt entitled to take. Let me ask you this. She leaned forward slowly, intentionally, her voice calm enough to feel like a blade wrapped in velvet. If you believe people with more owe you something, why didn't you give anything when you finally had enough? The man blinked. It was such a simple question. A child could have answered it. But arrogance has no vocabulary for accountability. He opened his mouth, closed it. Tried again. Nothing came out but silence, the kind that exposes, not protects. His shoulders sank. Not dramatically, just enough to show the weight finally landing on him. I was trying to get ahead, he whispered. Judy didn't nod. She didn't soften. Sometimes mercy isn't letting someone fall gently. It's making them understand why they're falling. You weren't trying to get ahead, she replied. You were trying to stand on someone else so you didn't have to climb. His eyes flickered, shame creeping in where arrogance once lived. And you didn't choose someone wealthy, she continued. You chose the man who gave you a chance. The man who believed you. The man who sacrificed for his own family now, and still helped you. She let that sit. It hit harder than shouting ever could. You didn't steal money, she said quietly. You stole trust. The gallery was still. Not even a cough. Not even a shuffle. And then Judy delivered the line that shattered him completely. A real man pays who helped him. A coward waits until it's convenient. The defendant looked down, for the first time truly down, not avoiding eye contact, but finally seeing himself in the reflection of what he'd done. It wasn't anger in his face. It was recognition, the kind that hurts more than punishment. His lips trembled. Just once. You want the world to believe you were surviving? Judy said. But survival doesn't mock the hand that held it up. Only ego does. He didn't defend himself. He couldn't. Arrogance had finally run out of air, and in that moment everyone saw it. Judge Judy had never been the underdog. She had simply chosen patience instead of power, silence instead of spectacle. Truth instead of triumph, and truth, a quiet, steady, unshakable, had just won. He didn't look up again. Not once. The bravado that swaggered into the courtroom earlier sat abandoned somewhere between arrogance and realization, and what replaced it was the raw, unfamiliar weight of consequence. His shoulders rounded, his stare fixed on the table. fingers tracing the grain in desperate repetition, like he hoped the wood might give him an escape his pride could not. And Judge Judy? She didn't gloat. Real authority doesn't celebrate the fall. It acknowledges the truth that forced it. She leaned back, breathing in slowly, as if absorbing every emotion in the room. The landlord's exhaustion, the gallery's moral outrage, the defendant's shrinking ego, and the silent crown of dignity that had chosen to sit with kindness rather than power. You believe wealth owes you kindness, she said softly. You never considered that kindness might have built that wealth in the first place. The defendant's chest tightened. You could see the small rise and fall, the shallow breath of someone learning humility, not by choice, but by exposure. The landlord looked over at him, not with hatred, not with smug victory, just disappointment. The quiet kind that hurts deeper than anger ever could. I helped you, he whispered, and you punished me for it. Those words didn't hit like an accusation, they landed like a eulogy. A eulogy for trust, for faith in humanity, for the simple belief that if you lift someone, they won't try to stand on your neck. The defendant's lips parted like he wanted to answer. Maybe apologize. Maybe defend himself, maybe explain, but nothing came out. Shame numbs the tongue faster than pride sharpens it. Judge Judy turned to the landlord. In a world where kindness is often mistaken for weakness, she said, you chose grace. And grace is never wasted, even when people fail to deserve it. A hush swept through the room again. There is a sacredness in hearing decency honored. The way it reminds people that good hasn't gone extinct. It just refuses to shout. Then Judy looked back at the defendant. You did not take advantage of wealth, she said. You took advantage of kindness. And that is far uglier. He flinched, not physically but emotionally, a bruise forming beneath the surface where ego used to live. And worse, she continued, her tone lower, steady, devastating in its calm. You thought you could disguise entitlement as struggle. There it was, the truth that stripped him bare. He wasn't a survivor. He was a taker who wore survival like camouflage. His eyes watered, not a breakdown, not a sob, just one tiny fracture leaking through the armor he had built out of excuses. Stand up, she said quietly. He obeyed, slower this time, shoulders bent not from size but from surrender. You will repay every month, Judy said. Every late fee he forgave. Every dollar you claimed you could not give. Because debt is not always measured in money. She let the words breathe. Sometimes debt is measured in character, and today you begin to pay both. The man nodded. One stiff, humbled nod, for the first time since entering the courtroom. He wasn't resisting. He was listening. And when you make that payment, she added, don't think of it as punishment. A pause. Think of it as the day you stopped confusing mercy with weakness and started becoming someone who earns what he receives. He swallowed. Hard. People don't change in a moment, but they begin in one, and this was his beginning. Judy sat back, and even without a gavel, the room felt the verdict. No dramatics. No shouting. Just moral gravity, heavier than any courtroom hammer could ever be. Then she spoke one final time, voice softer than before and almost compassionate. When someone gives you a chance, you pay them back. Not because the law demands it, but because integrity does, and there it was. The lesson, the scar, the dignity resurrected in a world that too often doubts it exists. The defendant wiped at his eye. One quick motion like he hoped no one would see. But everyone saw. Not weakness. Growth trying to breathe. The landlord nodded once, not triumphant, simply relieved that the world still had order, still had justice, still rewarded good even when good arrives quietly. And Judge Judy? Still calm, still small in stature, still massive in presence. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. She didn't win with volume, she won with truth because real power doesn't roar. It rests, and waits, and rises at the exact moment the world needs reminding who it belongs to. And today, it belonged to dignity, to gratitude, to principle, and to one judge who chose patience over pride and still conquered both. Before we reach the final verdict, tell me honestly in the comments, have you ever helped someone, and they turned on you once they got what they wanted? Your story might remind someone they're not alone. The courtroom didn't erupt. No applause, no gasps, no cheers. Just the kind of silence that only arrives when a moment is too heavy for sound to carry. People didn't need noise. They needed time to feel what they'd just witnessed. Truth doesn't always shock. Sometimes it settles, it seeps, it lingers in the ribcage like a reminder from life itself. Character counts more than comfort, and dignity is louder than ego ever will be. The defendant stood there, not the towering force he tried to be, Not the defiant rebel against unfair wealth he pretended to represent, but a man stripped of excuses, stripped of audience approval, stripped of stories he told himself to sleep at night. And Judge Judy, still calm, still seated, still the smallest person in the room but somehow the largest, spoke again, not delivering punishment but truth. "You are going to repay every owed amount," she said. "In full. And then some." He nodded, jaw tight, eyes unfocused. It wasn't fear now. It was realization stacking like bricks on his conscience. "You will return," Judy continued. "Every bit of rent you withheld, because while you convinced yourself you were surviving, you were feeding your pride, not your stomach." That line settled deep, not just in him but in the gallery. People know hunger. People understand survival. But exploiting kindness to avoid responsibility? That sits differently. It stains differently. "You will also cover court costs," she added. His throat bobbed. A tiny acknowledgement. Not complaint, not protest, just acceptance. "And listen carefully," she said, leaning forward slightly, voice low. "This is not punishment. This is alignment. Life must correct imbalance before it breaks." He blinked slowly, like each word pierced deeper than the last. Not because it was harsh, but because it was true. "You think because someone has more?" Judy continued. "They deserve to give without limits. But prosperity earned through effort doesn't owe a debt to entitlement." She pointed gently toward the landlord. Not commanding attention, but granting it. He worked. He built, he sacrificed. He extended grace when he had no obligation to. The landlord looked down again, modest even now. Good people often shrink when praised. Humility is their instinct. "And you," Judy turned back to the defendant, "took advantage of grace because it cost you nothing to receive it. You never considered the cost it took to give it." The defendant swallowed again. Shame has a way of drying the voice, tightening the throat. "You lied about need," she continued, "because you wanted comfort without effort. You abused sympathies, and that is a theft deeper than money." He didn't move, didn't blink. Anyone could see something breaking inside him. Not pride anymore, but the illusion that pride had protected him all this time. "You asked why you should pay someone who already has much," she said. "I will tell you why." She paused, and every eye leaned forward. "People who have built deserve respect, not resentment. People who give deserve honor, not exploitation." You could sense the energy shift. Not dramatic, but grounded, moral, human. "Your problem," she said softly, "is not lack of money. It is lack of gratitude." A tear slipped. He brushed it quickly, trying to pretend it didn't exist, but he knew, everyone knew. Arrogance was no longer armor, it was rubble. "And today," she finished, "you will begin learning the value of what was offered to you, and what you squandered by confusing generosity with obligation." She leaned back. Calm again, verdict settled not by force but by truth that could not be argued. Judgment for the plaintiff. The gavel wasn't needed. The words alone were final enough. The defendant sat slowly, like gravity had doubled just for him. He didn't storm out. Didn't argue. Didn't mutter about unfairness or wealth inequality or systems. Some people only meet reality when consequences hold their hand and refuse to let go. The landlord gathered his papers quietly. You could see his hands tremble. Not with anger, not even with relief, but with the lingering ache of being betrayed by someone he rooted for. People forget, being good is easy. Staying good after someone wrongs you is the real test. He turned slightly toward the defendant, not to gloat, not to shame, but simply to see the human being he once believed in. And in that glance a story lived. "I wanted you to win too. I just wanted you to do it right." The defendant couldn't meet his eyes. His shoulders curled inward. A sign that ego had finally surrendered to self-awareness. One painful truth about growing up is realizing that the mirror is sometimes the harshest judge in the room. And Judge Judy? She sat back, hands folded, expression softening just barely, the way a teacher looks not at a troublemaker but at someone who might finally be ready to learn. She didn't smile. She didn't soften into sentimentality. She didn't need to. Her lesson wasn't kindness instead of justice. It was kindness through justice. There's a difference. A powerful one. Some judges swing hammers. She raised people, even the ones who didn't deserve it yet. Court adjourned. People rose. The gallery slowly emptied, voices hushed. Out of respect, not command. The landlord exited first. Slow steps, quiet composure. The dignity of a man who never needed to humiliate someone to feel tall. Behind him the defendant stood. He hesitated. Not from fear of cameras or gossip, but because facing the world after losing to truth requires more courage than he had ever practiced. He didn't storm. He didn't stomp, he walked. One step at a time, the same way humility arrives. When he reached the door, he stopped, half turning back toward Judy. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. But he whispered, low, raw, barely audible. I'll pay him. Not a defense, not an excuse. Just a sentence stripped of ego. And maybe that was the first real thing he'd said all day. Life will always test you with two questions. What do you do when you have nothing? What do you do when someone gives you something? This man failed the second test. But redemption doesn't begin with being right. It begins with finally admitting you were wrong. Kindness is not weakness. Generosity is not naivety. And humility is not defeat. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who never needed to raise their voice. Real talk. If you've ever helped someone who later disrespected you, if you've ever been kind and treated like you were foolish for it, if you've ever believed in someone who turned your belief into their excuse, type respect isn't free in the comments, not to shame them, but to remind the world that dignity, compassion, and integrity aren't relics. They live in people like you, and as long as they do, there's hope. Now hit subscribe, share your story below, and remember, being kind is not weakness. It's choosing strength without needing applause, and someone out there needed to hear that today.